Our first speaker today is Dr. David Campbell. He is the ethicist, with the Kingston Health Sciences Centre. He provides ethics leadership and support for Kingston Health Sciences Centre staff, clinicians, leaders, patients, and families. He is also the Southeast Ontario Ethics Lead and provides ethics support and leadership to hospitals and community partners across the Southeast region. David, I'd like to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. Perfect. Okay. All right. Let's go. Well, thanks so much for inviting me, and I'm really, it's a great honor to speak with you today. I'm going to talk about the topic of moral distress and caregiver burnout, and also looking at moral resiliency, so how you can develop resiliency to help avoid caregiver burnout. So when we look at healthcare, quite often we really focus on really just the tip of the iceberg, which is, physical health. But the reality is, like an iceberg, there's so much more to health than that. There's also mental health, social health, environmental health, spiritual health, all these other factors that are really below the surface and that quite often get missed or not really addressed, or really the harder parts to deal with. And especially as a caregiver, if you're caring for a loved one at home, doing it on your own, or if there are limited supports, it's everything else that you have to deal with that can cause so much stress. Now, moral distress is a very specific term within the health ethics literature, and it shouldn't be confused with a moral dilemma. A moral dilemma is when you're really not sure what the right thing to do is. It's like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. You're just not sure what the right thing to do is. Moral distress is different. It is actually, you know what the right thing to do is, but you can't do it. You cannot do it because there's something in your way. There's something beyond your control. And it causes an intense discomfort because you just can't do the right thing. And you cannot control it. It's just, you feel powerless. And it's very, very important to acknowledge it and address it, because if you don't, over time, it can lead to burnout and it can lead to disillusionment and especially a sense of powerlessness. And we see this a lot within healthcare where, I work in a hospital, and so situations where hospital staff, they cannot do their jobs properly. They cannot fulfill their professional, their ethical, legal obligations to their patients. And it really, truly causes damage to the point that they feel they're not doing any good, and they feel that, oh no, the healthcare system, it's broken, nobody cares, why should I care? And that can over time cause moral injury, where it can damage your sense of being a good person. And for a caregiver, if you cannot do what you think is the right thing for the care receiver, the person you're caring for, due to factors out of your control, it can really damage your sense of being a caregiver. You think, oh my God, I'm a terrible caregiver. I'm not a good caregiver. I'm maybe not a good person. Like, what am I doing? I'm not helping. I'm harming. That is a horrible place to be. You don't want to be there. It's really important, therefore, to address moral distress. So, what are some of the causes of moral distress? There are many, many, many. So many, and you as caregivers, you could list so many issues. So these are just some of them, and I can't capture all of them in a presentation. But for caregivers, resources is definitely a huge issue, and it could be lack of community supports, and that's just a huge problem. And it always has been a huge problem. The pandemic has made it worse, and it will continue to be a huge problem. There are just not enough community supports to help individuals who suffer from brain injury. There just aren't. So what do you do? It's a huge problem. I don't have the answers, by the way. It's a huge problem. Another cause of moral distress could be lack of family support. Maybe you're the caregiver and you are taking on all of the care for your loved one who suffered from a brain injury, and your siblings are not helping out, or maybe you're a parent and your spouse is not helping out, or maybe your you're caring for a child who's had a brain injury, and your other children are really not helping out. They're actually making things worse. This can be a huge cause of moral distress, because I mean, you can't make others help you. You just can't. If you have siblings who maybe live in another city or province, maybe another country, it's all on you to provide care for your loved one who has brain injury. You would like for them to help, but they just won't, or they say they can't. You feel that burden, and there's nothing you can do. It causes major moral distress. Sometimes it could be a matter of the care receiver. Now that sounds a little bit clunky. I usually say patient, but I just, you might not think of your family member as being a patient, but anyways, the care receiver. Maybe it's the care receiver not cooperating with the care. And especially, as we know, with individuals' brain injuries, it can affect their personalities. It can affect their ability to retain information. And every brain injury is different. I mean, their needs are different. And it can be very, very difficult to try to provide care for someone who is not participating or refuses. What do you do? How much should you try to pressure them? That's a huge question. It's a huge ethical dilemma. And you can't make them. You can't force them. So what do you do? And related to that, there could be a huge difference between the caregiver needs and your ability to support those needs. Your own limitations. You only have so many hours in the day. You also have your own life. You might have other responsibilities, professional responsibilities. You might have responsibilities to your other children, or maybe you're providing care for a child who has a brain injury, and you've got your own elderly parents with dementia you have to care for. You might be part of that sandwich generation. Like, who knows? There can be so many different issues related to that. But the thing is, the needs of the person that you're providing care for and your ability to care for them don't always match. And that can cause immense moral distress and immense feelings of guilt that you cannot provide the care that your loved one truly needs. And then, as we all know, COVID. This is, 2.5 years of this pandemic. It has caused massive amounts of issues and stress and lack of resources. That's just amplified all of these issues. The healthcare system is so strained. I could give you all sorts of horror stories in the hospital, but I won't. But COVID has just made things so much worse. And what can you do about COVID? It's not like, oh, I'm going to try to stop the pandemic, right? You're very limited what you can do. All of these can cause moral distress. Beyond the lookout, burnout. Caregiver burnout is a huge problem. It's a serious issue, and it's really, really, really important to identify it and address it, and make sure that you try to nip it in the bud, or at least respond to it in a healthy, practical manner. So what are the dangers of caregiver burnout? And you know this, I'm just kind of reminding you. But it can really, one thing I encounter with caregiver burnout and is that caregivers can feel intense feelings of guilt, that they're not being able to provide the care that they feel they should, that the patient needs. And it can really, really cause guilt. And sometimes it can cause guilt because the amount of time they have to spend providing care for the loved one who's brain injury, they cannot spend time caring for maybe their other family members. They can't spend as much time as they should on their job. I mean, so many other things can suffer because of this. Maybe they have to leave their job to provide care full time, which can be very, very stressful and can involve feelings of guilt. And it can unfortunately cause some feelings of resentment. Maybe you're resentful at the situation that, why am I stuck with this? Like, why did this happen to me? Why did my loved one have that car accident that led to the brain injury? Like, why did this have to happen? Or maybe could cause resentment to other family members who are not chipping in, who are not helping, or resentment against the healthcare system that it does not have the resources that should be helping you. Like, it can lead to resentment and anger, which does not help. It's not healthy. As I mentioned, it can damage relationships with family members. Maybe you feel your spouse is not really helping out as a caregiver and you're doing all of the work. And unfortunately, I'm generalizing here, of course, generalization, but many times it's the women wind up being in caregiver roles, and the siblings, the brothers don't help as much, or maybe the spouse doesn't help as much as he should, and that can cause damage to your family, major damage, which again is unhealthy. It's not healthy. And it could unintentionally harm the care receiver, the person you're providing care for, your loved one, your family member, or the patient you're providing care for. And this could be where perhaps you lose your patience with them, and you lose your temper, and you get angry at them, and you say hurtful things in the heat of the moment, even though you don't mean it, but it can happen. Or you might be a little bit rough in providing care because it's so difficult to provide care, and you could unintentionally cause some harm to the person who's receiving care. And caregiver burnout, it harms you, the caregiver, over time. And if you burn out, if you're not eating properly, if you're not sleeping, if you're stressed out, if you're getting angry, if it's causing such strain on your job where you may have to lose your job or quit your job, or to fill your role as caregiver, or where even your spouse could be resentful. I've encountered situations where caregiver burnout leads to divorce, like huge personal costs. It can harm you. And if you get harmed, if you burn out, then who will care for your loved one? Who? So it's so important to pace yourself and to look after yourself, and that's true for anyone providing care, be it a professional caregiver in the healthcare system, to a family member providing care for a loved one at home. You have to look after yourself. Who will care for you if you don't care for yourself? And who will care for your loved one who has the brain injury, who you're trying to care for if you burn out, if you get sick? You don't help anyone. So it's so important to look after yourself. One factor which I think really, really, really causes a lot of moral distress, and this could be one of the keys to identifying moral distress and helping to respond to it, is the role of unrealistic expectations. I say collectively, all of us, we're all guilty of this, including myself. We have very unrealistic expectations. We have unrealistic expectations of the healthcare system. We expect a world-class healthcare system, but we don't want to pay for it. We complain when our taxes are too high. We expect the healthcare system to fix all sorts of social problems that are really beyond the ability of the healthcare system to address. We expect too much for community supports when community supports are limited. They have limited funding, and there's only so much they can do. We can expect too much of our families. Our families are going to chip in and help look after a loved one who has a brain injury, that they're going to step up and help out, and maybe they just can't. Maybe they just can't. And most importantly, we expect too much of ourselves, especially as caregivers. We expect ourselves to be these supermen, superwomen who just give everything to provide care for a loved one, and there are limits to what we can do, and we're human. We make mistakes. That happens. So we can expect far too much of ourselves. And so it's very, very important to really acknowledge and accept the tragic nature of reality. My background is as an ethicist, is in philosophy, actually, in moral philosophy, and a key thing is important to acknowledge the tragic nature of reality. Horrible things happen that are just no one's fault. They just happen. Accidents, for example, happen, and a lot of brain injuries are results of accidents where no one's at fault, or but they happen. And life is unfair. Life is horribly unfair, and we have to acknowledge that. And there are limits to what we can do, and there are limits to what we can fix, not only ourselves individually, but even collectively. Like, just for an example, homelessness. Homelessness is a massive problem. It's a huge problem, and it's not just a matter of, that we just need more money. It's much more complex than that. If anything is easy to fix, it would be fixed, but there are limits to what we can fix. There are. So it's important to acknowledge that, acknowledge our limits. And as a caregiver, I remind caregivers this all the time, there's no duty to be a martyr. You don't have a duty to sacrifice your life for others. There isn't. Like, at a certain point, you have to accept your limitations and accept that you need more help. So it's very important to acknowledge that we have unrealistic expectations and to address them. The hope for additional resources. I love this. For miracles precedes the right. I'm being very facetious here, basically saying that if you're hoping for additional resources, you'll probably have to hope for a long time. You might as well hope for a miracle. The resources are probably not going to come. You have to learn how to work within the resource that you have. So how do you respond to moral distress? Well, first, identify it. If we can label an issue, it helps. So identify you're experiencing moral distress. Second, talk about it. Just don't keep it in. Talk about it. Talk about it with someone who you trust. They have a good sense of judgment, who's a good listener. Ask for help. Reach out and ask for help. Practice self-care. Look after yourself and set realistic expectations. There's a lot of studies on moral resiliency, and very interesting. There are three common factors for individuals who have strong moral resiliency. They've identified these characteristics. They have a very strong acceptance of reality. They're realists. They have a strong sense of inner purpose and that they truly believe in what they're doing. And they're incredibly flexible and adaptable. And to be a good caregiver, you do have to have those, right? You have to accept reality. You have to believe in what you're doing, that you're doing good. And you have to be flexible and adaptable. Now, practicing moral resiliency when you're dealing with a difficult activity, and it could be anything, but there are ways of really addressing it, which I practice this all the time. It's very, very helpful. It's very practical. First, plan. Think about what you have to do, and break any difficult task down into chunks, into pieces, and focus on the immediate, and prioritize, like, what has to be done first things first, and just do it step by step by step by step by step. And then once you get in the zone, after a while, you realize, oh, wow, I did it. It wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. Visualize, mentally practice how you'll respond to stressful events. Always think about the worst possible situation and how we'd respond to it. And you find out your imagination is much worse than reality most of the time. And then you realize after, the stressful event happened that it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. So visualize. And then self-coaching. Always maintain internal monologue, stay focused and confident. Always maintain that confidence and tell yourself, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And banish negative thoughts away. Just say, no, focus on the task at hand, I can do this. And, if I can only get through after this needs to be done, if I can just, wait until lunchtime, this can be done. All of those tips will help when dealing with a very difficult activity. Going through this very quickly, but anyways, self-care, very important. Part of moral resiliency, you have to be self-aware. You have to allow yourself to slow down. Many times we're feeling stressed, we're rushing an activity. You could be caring for your loved one and doing something that they really don't like to do, but you have to do it for their, it could be, it could be anything from taking their kids to maybe showering. Who knows, right? But if you become frustrated, it becomes very difficult. So just take time to slow down and calm down, breathe, take a break, ask for help, and avoid unnecessary stressors. And social media, sometimes helpful, many times it can be very unhelpful. So just disentangle from them. Look after yourself. Take a break. just picture just reminding yourself that we all have limits, and none of us are the Energizer Bunny. We have to realize our limits, and you have to only know your limits. So you have to acknowledge that. And when you are feeling run down, address it. Do what you need to do to recharge your batteries. I'm a huge fan of the philosophy of Stoicism, and it's a very practical philosophy, and I practice it every day. Marcus Aurelius, he was a great Stoic philosopher, and he was a Roman emperor. And I love this quote: "You have the power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The Stoics acknowledge that most of life is completely beyond your control. Now that sounds kind of frightening, but it's true. So much of life you did not choose. You didn't choose to be born. You didn't choose your parents, your family, your nationality, your gender, your race, your ethnicity. When you were born, you didn't choose any of that. You just fell into it. You're born into it. And we cannot control other people. We can't. But we can control how we respond to others. We can decide whether we're going to get upset or not. That is a choice. So we can't control others, but we can control our reactions. Now you might say, well, easier said than done. Well, of course it is, but anything valuable takes practice. And you can control your emotions, of course. We all can. Why? Because we're adults. That's the difference between an adult and a child. A child cannot control their emotion. They're socialized into controlling themselves. They don't take temper tantrums, and then they, over time become an adult. So you can control your reaction. And that is a choice, whether you become upset when you're in traffic and something is bothering you or not. That you can control. And when you can find out what you can control, take action. And that is incredibly liberating. Do the best you can and then let it go. Confucius, another great philosopher. Attitude. The man who says he can and the man who says he cannot are both correct. It's true. If you believe you can do something, you will do it. If you don't believe you can do it, you won't. Is the glass half empty or half full? It's both. It's a matter of perspective. If anything, you should be happy they have a glass in the first place. How do you move a mountain? You do it one stone at a time, and if need be, one pebble at a time. So again, it's attitude. If you believe you can, if you believe you can make a difference, you will try to make a difference. This is a guide. It's Stoics Guide to Serenity. I practice this daily. It's very helpful. Do you have a problem in your life? No. Then don't worry. Do you have a problem in your life? Yes. Can you do something about it? No. Then don't worry. Why would you worry about something you can do nothing about? Do you have a problem in your life? Yes. Can you do something about it? Yes. Then do something about it. Take action and then let it go and don't worry, knowing that you've done the best you can. And as a caregiver, you can only do so much and you can only do the best you can. It's the best you can do, right? And let it go. Forgive yourself. To wrap up, always remember the little things. I mean, things could be bad. They could always be a heck of a lot worse. Be thankful. Be thankful for what you have. Don't take things too seriously. One of the best things for resiliency is having a sense of humor, being able to laugh at situations. That is very, very, very liberating, incredibly liberating. I have a very good friend who her brother had a massive stroke, and the family decided that they were going to care for him at home. And I asked her, how do you do it? But she says, because at times she could cry, so she chooses to laugh instead. And having that sense of humor is so helpful. Reflect in the past, plan for the future, but live in the present. Don't live in the past, just live in the present. And again, forgiveness. And you don't have to be religious to acknowledge the importance of forgiveness. You got to forgive yourself. You'll make mistakes. The person receiving care might make mistakes. Like when you make mistakes, you got to forgive yourself, forgive others. Gratitude, the best medicine. Take a dose every morning, may cause shifts in perspective, may cause feelings of abundance, may decrease feelings of fear and anxiety. Again, very important to have a sense of gratitude. Be very thankful for what you have. And again, just try to do the best you can. I'd recommend this mug for anyone. I'm trying to be awesome today, but I'm exhausted from being so freaking awesome yesterday. And yeah, I went through this very quickly, but I don't want to take up too much time, but thank you very much. Just acknowledge that being a caregiver, it's an incredibly important job, an incredible difficult job. It can be frustrated, but focus on how rewarding it is and how important it is, and not on the things that you miss, but the things that you're able to do, and how valuable it is, and look after yourself. Because if you don't look after yourself, you cannot look after your loved one. So yeah, and always remind yourself you're amazing. What you do is amazing. I'm truly amazed at what you do. Anyways, that's my presentation, my contact information. Anyone ever like to get a hold of me for any ethical issues or concerns? And yeah, if time for some Q&A.
Heather, thank you so much, David. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. And I just reading those quotes and hearing you say them, it just really helped me put some things in perspective for myself, right? I'm not a caregiver, but just in general life circumstances that we need to kind of take that moment and realize what we need to be doing. I do have one question that did come in here for you. Why do you think the public health system ignores caregivers? That's a big one. I'm sorry.
That's a big one. No, that's a great question.
And we have, and if that's not a suitable question for you, that's all right, because we do have our second speaker queued up that is also willing to speak to this question as well as part of her discussion. So I'll leave that to the side.
I mean, it's a huge question that involves a huge answer, and I will not do a very good job answering it. But I'd actually challenge the question a little bit, in that I think more and more the healthcare system is really appreciating the importance of caregivers. It just doesn't do it enough, and it should do a lot more to do so. But part of the problem, and the problem in healthcare, as you know, is that we don't have one healthcare system. There are multiple healthcare systems, and it's very fractured. So I'm in a hospital basis, an acute care hospital, and there's also community care, and there are also, private healthcare organizations. And so every time you're dealing with a system, you're just dealing with part of a system and individuals within the system. And so, for example, within an acute care hospital, we really have to focus on the acute care issues of an individual. And we focus on that because that's our obligation. But many times that does involve and needs to involve the caregiver as well. So we do try to as much as possible. But that being said, we need to do a much, much, much better job. I definitely agree. So I don't 100% agree with the question in that it ignores caregivers. Sometimes we don't pay enough attention as that we should. And probably we should, as a society, I think more than just the healthcare system, appreciate the role of caregivers and start, providing more financial, like you get no financial support. Like we should start doing more of that. But that's a huge, huge issue, and where to begin. And that's, sorry.
That's quite all right. Liv, I see you've jumped in here. Would you like to say a few words on that?
I think that this is actually a really great segue to the kind of work and the kind of movement we're trying to build, knitting together lots of folks who've been siloed from each other in different provincial jurisdictions, in different segments of the healthcare system. As you say, David, in every province, there's a healthcare system, but within that, there are so many different pieces. So we are trying to knit together and bring together lots of voices from across the country to better advocate for caregivers. And that's part of what I'm going to be talking about. And both filling gaps in these systems, but also trying to advocate for some wider scale change. So yeah, I'm going to talk all about that in just a moment.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Liv. And thank you, David, for joining us today. I really appreciate your talk, and a lot to think about and things to put into practice. I think that's the key, is just to start to little by little start to implement that. So I do thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.